Hello out there, and welcome back to the GamecocksGroup.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecocksGroup.com on Rivals. Make sure you subscribe wherever you are listening or watching so that you get updates anytime we go live or post a podcast episode. Usually we do about once a week during the off season, but we had a very special weekend with the spring game and everything, so we wanted to get some thoughts out there, some initial reactions from the spring game immediately before our Thursday show, where we'll get back into some baseball and probably some other football notes. All right. So, Alan, you were at the spring game. Give me some takeaways from the crowd. I know that South Carolina announced 51,000 strong at the spring game, and announced that about an hour.
About an hour after Clemson put that 50,000 out there.
I liked it. Hey, honestly, last year I very much think that they underestimated. So if they overestimated a little bit this year to like stick it to them, also it looked like there was a really good crowd. But if they overestimated a little bit to like stick it to them, whatever, like it's kind of like a ref making a correction after a bad call.
Makeup call.
Yeah, exactly.
It was good. I mean, the lower bowl was almost completely full. The home sideline was. The student section was decently packed. They had it like kind of roped off about 2/3 of the way up, but up to there it was full. Visitor sideline on the other end zone. I don't know what direction that is, but I don't know. I'd say the lower bowl was like 3/4 to 4/5 of the way full, which for a spring game, I mean, that's still probably 35, 40,000 if I had to guess. I don't know what the lower bowl holds, but something like that probably. They were into it. They were loud. Trey Knox was talking about that after the game. That was his first Willie B experience. Shane Beamer, of course, was into it. They had a lot of recruits there, which you mentioned in the weekly recruiting wrap-up last week. And also I saw a decent bit of them going onto the field, just hanging out, watching warm-ups. It couldn't hurt, that atmosphere. I mean, it's better than a lot of places have for a spring game.
No, definitely. I looked around the country. I know Auburn in particular got kind of thrown under the bus on social media because I think they said they had like 30,000 and it looked like they had like 300 maybe. It was rough. But yeah, so I will have more recruiting news throughout the week on that. I know Lee Wardlaw, who also does some recruiting stuff for Gamecock Scoop, has reached out to several recruits that were there this past weekend as well. We already know that defensive lineman Jordan Thomas, coming off of the weekend, has set an official visit for June 23rd. I just saw wide receiver Parker Livingstone set an official visit for June 2nd, I think. I'll have several future cast, I think, that I'm going to put in this week based on what I'm hearing and some buzz coming out of the weekend. By all accounts, was a really good weekend. You didn't get that, Sunday night welcome home, that maybe you would have been anticipating, but it's also early. I think June is the next time that we're really going to see a big flurry of commitments, but also between now and then, it wouldn't surprise me if we see a few too, as people kind of get back home and process their visit out. You also had pretty much every commit in the 2024 class on campus. I want to say Mazio Bennett was the only one that wasn't there, at least that I'm aware of. But Dante Reno came down. We're going to catch up with him in a day or two. All the linemen, the tight ends. So, good for recruiting to have a crowd like that. Let's get to the game itself. Now, before we start breaking down this game with, I think we're going to go 10 plus takeaways here and concerns and surprises and all that sort of thing. Let's start with the obvious caveat. It's a spring game. There are things I think you can gather, especially when there's a lot of new faces, new offensive coordinator, those sorts of things that I think that we can start to dissect and take into the summer. But also, it's a spring game. It's a very controlled environment. One of my biggest concerns that we're about to talk about was offensive line, but also when you think about the format of the spring game, they split the starters up. That didn't really have the normal like cohesion and gelling that you would have if it's your normal starting five and all. So because of the way that the teams are constructed, because of a bunch of different factors, you're not getting a true vision. I mean, and just think back to past spring games. Those of you that have paid attention to them, you always have like a spring game hero that you never see again. And we can talk about who maybe that was this time too. But let's go with your biggest surprise with all of those caveats in mind of last Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes off what you just said. They're obviously one is tied to the other, but I thought the edge players held up better than I thought, given the lack of depth in that room. We've talked about that a lot. They were down to, I mean, really, it was Donovan Westmoreland who played well, I thought. Brian Thomas Jr. was very involved. Bam Martin Scott, that's not a true edge player, I guess, but he played linebacker. He looked good on a couple pass rushes. I think he had 2 sacks. I thought the pass rush looked better than I anticipated it. Of course, you're down tackles, which we'll get into in a second. So that obviously plays a factor in it. But they were able to get more pressure on the quarterbacks than I was anticipating. So I guess that's your positive surprise.
Yeah, I had notes on pretty much all of that as well. Another person that stood out that was recruited as a D tackle, but we knew could move pretty good for a big guy was Elijah Davis, and he ended up playing a good bit out on the edge. And I thought he looked
forced to fumble. Yeah.
Very disruptive, at times. But again, you're going against half the starting offensive line. I know you had Marky Anderson, who's a true freshman, in there at left tackle for most of the game on the black team. Or I don't.
That was the black team. Yeah.
It's hard to keep up which is which. I'm not gonna really worry about who was on what team and what the game result was. Although it went into overtime and the black
double overtime.
17. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So I agree with you on the edges being a positive surprise. Edges and linebackers combined, and
sure.
the linebackers were a real strength for me throughout the game. I guess I'm going to put this as my surprise, although maybe it shouldn't be, but I thought Lenore Sellers looked really good. He looked better. And again, with the caveat of who you're playing with, who you're playing against, all those sorts of things, right? Sellers ran with the the second half team and against the second half defense. So definitely had different looks than Luke Doty did. But I thought he played a better game than Luke Doty did, at least just from moving the ball and all that. We can talk about some of his limitations. I thought Sellers maybe was a little bit too quick to run and all that sort of stuff, but that's also stuff that's pretty typical with a true freshman. But poise, making plays. And, again, it's a spring game. The score is whatever, but you come in down 2 scores and kind of battle back. So that was
really
a nice
easy
surprise.
It was really, in my opinion, again, spring game caveats, blah, blah, blah. It was really easy to see why the staff likes him. He's got some moxie. He makes quick decisions in the pocket. You saw some of the arm strength. There was one, it's a 4th down play, completed a deep ball down the field, ended up leading to a touchdown, scramble for a 1st down on a 3rd down. There's something there. I think, like I said, it's easy to see why they picked him out.
Was it the 4th down that he hit DJ Black across the
Yes,
middle?
I think that was the first play of the 4th quarter, actually.
That was a beautiful throw. Very well timed. I do think his delivery is a little bit strange. It feels like it's short-armed or whatever, something that maybe he can work through mechanically. But yeah, I mean, he made some plays. I believe the broadcast said this, particularly on like a play he extended where he would have been. Oh, I remember exactly what it was. I think it was like 2nd down, and the snap got snapped over his head. He grabbed the ball,
scooped it with one hand
off the bounce, one hand, rolled out to his left, threw across his body, and threw it out of bounds. But even gave a receiver a shot to make a grab along the sideline. And the broadcast was like, "There's not another quarterback on the roster that can make that play athletically," and it's true. So he was able to show off some of that early promise. It's possible he's going to end up being a real steal, right? We talked a little bit last year about how late in the process the staff finally did offer him. Now, granted, they had who they thought was pretty much a sure thing in 2023 quarterback that ended up at Alabama. Dylan Lonergan. Man, I can remember his name for a second. So that was partially why they had kind of targeted their guy, and then it fell through. But hey, it may work out best for everyone there. So we'll see long term on that. All right, let's talk about a couple more takeaways. Or no, we talked about the the biggest surprise? What was your biggest concern coming out of Saturday?
I mean, it's kind of the elephant in the room. We haven't gotten to it yet. Maybe we should have, because it's kind of the one thing in the spring game. Jalen Nichols got hurt. I mean, that's not necessarily the game, but he goes down on the second possession for, he was on the black team, second possession for his offense, needed help getting off the field, had ice the whole time on the sideline. We saw him, didn't come back in. We don't have a diagnosis yet, but that didn't look good. There were a couple other players who got banged up that were able to come back, or Beamer said they would have come back if it was a real game, Kawhi Banks being one. That did not look good for Jalen Nichols, and that's obviously someone you're really counting on at left tackle. And we'll just have to wait and see there.
Yeah, I don't want to speculate too much without us knowing fully everything, but they did show a couple shots of him in the broadcast, and he was smiling on the trainer table, which there's your positive, but also looked like they were putting some sort of air cast or brace on that leg. So we'll have to see how that goes, and if he'll be able to get back in time for fall, or at least, only miss a few weeks or something like that. My concern is that along those same lines, the offensive line looked pretty shaky at times, but again, I'm kind of taking into the fact that you had some people starting because of the way that the roster management is that are not.
Ja'Kai Moore wasn't there too. Yeah. You mentioned that.
Right. So that's a brief concern, but I would say my other concern was what we've been talking about all offseason, which is really the running game. I will give some positive notes. I thought Mario Anderson, body type wise, looks like he fits, and at the very least, I feel like he can pretty reliably get you 2 or 3 yards on first down or whatever. He's pretty decisive once he has the ball in his hands and he just hits the hole. He didn't show too much movement other than that, right? He was just like, I'm strong in a bowling ball and I'm going to stick my head in and get 2 or 3 yards. It's kind of the
Frank Gore thing, right? Just make sure you're always falling forward instead of falling backwards.
Which is very advantageous. I think he definitely has a role on this team. And then I did think DeCarry and Joyner looked okay at times. The thing that's always been good about him with the ball in his hands as a wide receiver, as a quarterback, whatever, is his vision. And I think we saw a little bit of that sort of apply to the running back position. But I don't know. You're still, I feel like you're still definitely a little deficient in that room. And it's going to be a pass to set up the run situation if the room looks pretty similar to what it did on Saturday as we head into the season.
Yeah, I mean, you like what you saw from Bradley Dunn. DJ Twitty makes the game-winning play, but I don't think you're counting on either of those guys to take 15 carries in an SEC game. So you're right. It's going to have to be Portal, like we talked about.
Miller had a nice touchdown run, too.
Oh, yeah. Forgot about that. Yep. Good little, it was like a 6-yard run, little juke to the outside.
Yeah. But yeah, and again, some of that's the offensive line, not creating a bunch of holes and all of that. I do think it's really interesting because there is some natural ability there from Joyner that seemed to flash for me a little bit. But you're also like, man, you're like a 6-year senior and just moved to this position. It's kind of like, man, maybe they should have done that 3 years ago or whatever. But of course, your running back room looks a little bit different back then. But yeah, we'll see how it plays out. I mean, if he can continue to bulk through the offseason, because I still think he's a little bit undersized for the position, and not lose too much speed, he could definitely be a good change of pace, him and Joyner.
Yeah, for sure. And then that kind of talking about skill positions gets me to another thing. Tight end's good, involved. Trey Knox catches a touchdown. Josh Simon had 6 receptions. Elksness, you saw, I don't think he caught a ball, but you saw a bit of him. Connor Cox had a catch on that last possession of regulation. That room's a lot better. And Beamer basically said that verbatim post-game, that they like the tight ends a lot more than they did last year. I think you're going to be able to see that room do a lot of different things just in terms of skill set positions, in terms of who can do what and kind of how it all fits together. There's a lot of options for the tight ends this year for Jody Wright in that room. I think you saw some of that Saturday.
Yeah, we didn't even mention this when we were talking about Sellers, but Sellers hit a tough throw to Connor Cox that would have won the game in the first overtime for the Garnet. But Cox just bobbled it. But so that was another, I guess, pause. I mean, it was a tough throw, but he hit him in the chest with it. Anyway, tight ends really stood out to me. Trey Knox is a gigantic.
Just walking past him, like seeing him post game in the interview room. That is a huge human being.
Yeah, and you actually, there was one play that stood out to me That kind of shows what he brings to the table, and it probably didn't look like much on TV, but he took like a little. I think it might have been the play that he scored a touchdown on, but it was like a little 5-yard stop or drag or whatever,
Yeah.
and he caught it. And the safety, I want to say it was DQ Smith, hit him as hard as he could.
Yes, that was a touchdown.
Came in like full steam ahead right as the ball got there, and he just like bounced off of Trey Knox because
he's huge.
I don't know how you're going to take that guy down. And
Pop Howard did on the play before, though. That was another thing. He got him at the 1 yard line, so he set up that play.
That's true.
Or the 3, I guess.
But yeah, that was just a good, like, he did everything that you want from a tight end there, I guess. High pointing the ball, withstood the hit, and was the biggest body there, and used that body to kind of box out anyone else. I think he's going to be a red zone weapon for sure. And yeah, I thought we just talked about Knox.
Simon,
Western Kentucky. Yeah. Joshua Simon ended up being the best offensive weapon for the Black Garnet.
It's Luke Doty's team.
Yeah, Luke Doty's team. And so to have both those weapons on the field at the same time and 2 tight end sets is going to be really interesting and really mismatch against a lot of linebackers and stuff in the league, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And you kind of sticking with the offense and mismatches. It's what you'd expect. It doesn't mean a whole lot. You kind of knew, but Spencer good, Juice good. That connection looks as good as it did all offseason. You had a 55-yard pass on the first drive from Spencer to Juice, and later in the game with Tanner Bailey playing quarterback. Juice, I don't know who was playing corner, but he completely beats his man wide open. Tanner Bailey throws a dime, and that's a touchdown. So your best players were still your best players too, which maybe you weren't concerned about, but it never hurts to see.
Yeah, definitely. And Juice also got the touchdown grab. Did you say that already?
Yeah.
And if we're going to stay with wide receiver, I did think that Eddie Lewis at least flashed.
Yes.
He didn't make any plays, but there were a couple times he was running wide open down the field and just got missed. But I think he flashed as a deep threat, someone that's going to get open. And that was against the first team defense, the first team secondary. Granted, there were some people banged up or whatever, but that was most of the first team guys out there. And obviously they didn't do live punts and stuff, but we're expecting him to be the punt returner.
Yes.
So Eddie Lewis, if you've been hiding under a rock or didn't see that he transferred in or whatever, that's definitely a name I think to put on your radar as we head into the fall.
You can see why they like him a punt returner too, even though obviously he didn't get to do that. He's got the straight line vision. He's got kind of the lateral quickness, can get around guys. And hands, I mean, he did have that one catch on the sideline from, I guess that was Doty, I think late in the second quarter. Or maybe, no, I think it was Tanner Bailey. It was that drive they scored on. Really nice catch on the sideline there. I thought he ran out of bounds back in, but the refs didn't. I think you know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah, they didn't show a full replay of him running out and back in, but they did show a replay of the catch. And obviously,
really good catch.
It's a spring game, so they're not going to review it or anything. But I think it might have stood up to review. It was close, but it was
either way. I like what I saw from Eddie Lewis too. And Trey Knox said post game that he's going to be a playmaker for this team, and it's hard to argue with that.
Oh, definitely. Defensively, we've hit on a couple of these guys already, but I really saw a step forward from Stone Blanton at the linebacker position. He seemed to be involved in like all over the field. We did hear a little post game that Beamer had to kind of like settle down the defensive staff because they were sending a lot of blitzes and stuff. But the linebackers and the edge play combined to really be disruptive on almost every play on both teams. That's why after that first drive from Rattler, it was really hard to get some things going after that.
Yeah, I really too with the defense. You talk about freshmen. We already mentioned Pup Howard. He had one good play to stand up Trey Knox. I thought he played pretty well. Jalen Kilgore made a really nice tackle in space at one point. That's a true freshman who I don't know how much he's going to play, but you're definitely looking for things from him in the long term. And Judge Collier made I think 2 tackles. I remember one on Peyton Mangrum for sure. I think he had a couple of good plays, kind of using the sideline, using his body. Again, I don't know how much any of those guys are seeing the field in 2023 with what you have coming back at your corner room, whether that's Marcellus Dial or Donald Fortune, and certainly in your safeties with Eamon and DQ. But you saw, again, you talk about signs of life, flickers, things where you understand, oh, so that's why they recruited him from the freshman. I think you saw that for most of them.
Yeah, definitely. And we talked before about how the concerns on each side of the ball kind of offset each other to some degree, right? Because we were concerned about the run defense and the run game. Run defense definitely got the better of the run game in the spring game, and it's hard to fully parse. Is that just because the run game is so weak or what? But I was really impressed. I think the defensive tackles as a group are like capital G great, honestly, at this point.
And you didn't even have Tonka available
exactly.
either.
I saw TJ Sanders. You saw, we talked about Elijah Davis playing inside and outside. Saw
Boogie was out there.
Yeah, exactly. There was another, Xavier McLeod. I even saw him flash a little bit, true freshman. So yeah, I think you feel very good about the interior. I think you feel very good about the talent at linebacker. They're young. They're not a lot of experience. There's probably going to be some mistakes there. And then the edge, it really worked out better than I was expecting. Brian Thomas Jr., I thought really flashed. Now, he's still built a little bit more like a pass rush specialist. So you might still, be switching him in and out depending on the situation and stuff. But at least he did show that explosiveness off the edge. And then, Elijah Davis going up against a true freshman. So take it with a grain of salt. But I thought he really was disruptive throughout the whole game.
Yeah, he was for sure. And that's kind of the whole thing. You mentioned it earlier with kind of weird combinations of guys. You've got a starter playing next to a backup, playing next to a starter on the offensive line. They did this as a draft format. So it's not like you had the whole first team against the whole second team or whatever. That's all you're really looking for here is just, again, the flashes, the signs. You saw it. I think you can kind of see what they're trying to piece together on defense and why Clayton White kind of feels good about this spring.
Yeah, I definitely came away feeling better about the defense than going into it, but also maybe slightly worse about the offense. But also, I think a lot of that has to do with how healthy you are on the offensive line and how well you're gelling with those starters. And we always knew that this was going to be sort of an issue. This is why they went and got Sidney Fugar and Gargiulio, who I did think played pretty well, by the way. Gargiulio played pretty well. But that's why they went and got them this offseason, is because you have this gap between that veteran group and then a lot of talent that you have coming in as freshmen, a lot of talent that you plan to have in next year, 2024 already with 3 4-star signed. But there's this like middle ground where you're like, okay, but how are we going to bridge that gap? I don't know. I don't know if we fully have those questions answered. I think if you get everyone healthy by the start of the season and they can stay healthy, your starting 5 you feel pretty good about, but the depth you have to be a little concerned about.
Yeah. Should we do spring awards? We got those too. I don't know if anybody wants to hear those, but got the list of those.
Yeah, just go one by one and we can kind of give a little bit
more. Your offensive player of the spring is Spencer Rattler. I don't have much to say.
Yeah. I mean, he looked good. He looked like he picked up kind of where he left off.
Keep in mind, this is for the whole spring, not just a spring game.
Right,
but,
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought the only, he scored with his one of his 4 possessions or however many he got. That's all you really want there.
Yeah. Your defensive player of the spring is TJ Sanders, who we just talked about. We think is going to be a big part of that defensive tackle room. Could play a little bit on the outside. I thought he looked good on Saturday night, and obviously he did in the practices too.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, you're never going to see defensive tackles flash that much unless you're really just honing in on them.
Right.
But I thought throughout the entire game, they were super disruptive inside and did not allow for any of those run lanes that we were talking about. So,
yeah, your special teams players of the spring, DQ Smith and Juju McDowell. That's kind of stuff you don't really notice when you're looking at those 2 guys when they're playing so much on starting defense and offense respectively, but they are playing on. You didn't see that much in the spring game either because, there's no kick returns, there's no punt returns, there's none of that in the spring game. But if, that's one where you kind of have to trust the staff on that because we haven't really seen it, but DQ and Juju.
Yeah, and we heard from Limbo last week that he thought Juju had really taken a step forward maturity-wise and particularly as a special teams player. So,
I guess we don't want to spend the football side on it, but your student athlete awards went to Tyree Johnson and Kai Kroger. Then your GPAs went to Colton Gauthier, Joseph Burns, and William Joyce. For football, most improved players on offense were DeCarrion Joyner and Omega Blake. Blake ran with the 2s in practice, the open portions of practice we saw, and in the spring game, he was out there with Doty. Curious what his role is in a really crowded receiver room. I'm not sure where he fits in, but if he's one of the most improved players on some level, the staff thinks he can squeeze in there. We saw him play a little bit in the Gator Bowl.
Yeah, I was about to say we saw him in the bowl game, so he's definitely been coming along. He should have had a big play on Saturday. Lenore Sellers threw a pass to him down the sideline, but it looked like there was some sort of miscommunication between the slot receiver, or maybe he was throwing it to the slot receiver. I don't know. Somebody was out of place because you ended up with two receivers in the same place, and it was kind of like a pop fly in center field or whatever. No one called it, and it just kind of like fell harmlessly. But if the slot receiver's not there, Omega Blake had a step on the corner, and the ball was on time, so he might have scored, honestly.
Yeah, your defensive most improved award, which I think you should feel good about, is O'Donnell Fortune. He's going to be your cornerback 2 this year. I would assume behind Marcellus Dial, you're going to need him to be big this year. He's going to be playing probably almost all the snaps, so that's a good sign there.
Yeah, I think you come away feeling pretty good about the secondary. They looked solid all day, even though they were hampered with a couple of injuries and people that sat out. And like you mentioned, a couple of freshmen flashed. Even Jalon Kilgore was someone that showed up several times on film for me. So.
Yeah, most improved special teams, Bradley Dunn. Again, you're not to kind of trust the staff on that. He's still not on scholarship, but maybe he gets a scholarship as a gunner or something. Gamecock Toughness Award, which isn't really defined as anything other than just being tough, but you've got 3 here. Nick Garzulio, Josh Simon, and Tyree Johnson. I guess that's good that 2 transfers are in there.
Yeah, and all at positions that I don't really know, again, how they define the criteria, but that you would want to be, quote unquote, like nasty and willing to get like down and dirty with it. So.
And then the last one, which I also don't know how they're defining, the South Carolina Spirit Award. You can take that to mean whatever you want. Juju McDowell, Boogie Huntley, and TJ Sanders to round out the spring awards.
All right, there you go. Any other like big surprises from Saturday? Or I guess I was a little disappointed that I didn't get to see much Desmond Umeozulu. I'm trying to think back to
he's hurt. I mean, he was hurt.
Right. Our preview episode. I'm trying to think back to some of the things that I was like looking for that didn't necessarily pop. The thing I think that was the biggest standout to me that we've mentioned several times is just maybe the edge is going to be okay, which is something that I've had a lot of, I guess, consternation about over the offseason. Did not get the same level of peace about the running back, but
yeah, my only other note, and it's a spring game, and you're not dealing with crazy crowd noise in a big SEC road game or anything like that. Clean game, only 4 penalties, just a couple pre-snap penalties. That's pretty good with a mishmash offensive line on both sides and freshmen playing up there. Beamer did mention post-game he thought they played a clean spring game. Again, it's in your own stadium in a controlled environment with refs that you hired, and it was a 44-minute game, not 60. But 4 penalties on 115 plays, still not bad.
Yeah, that stood out to me as well. All right. We've talked a lot. I don't want to like fully like speculate on who's going to leave or anything like that, but rank your quarterbacks after Spencer Rattler.
Luke Doty, that's still your backup. I think it has to be. I'm going to say Tanner Bailey 3. I thought he looked good, or I guess 2 behind Rattler, but 3 on the depth chart. He looked good. Threw a touchdown. We know he was traveling at the end of last year. Lenore Sellers 4. I like the flash. I like the potential. Braden Davis 5, I guess. I mean, he threw a pick 6. He really, really struggled back there. And I guess Daniels didn't play at all, I don't think. I don't think he's even
Gauthier.
That's right. Daniels isn't here anymore. I guess Gauthier 6. Yeah. I mean, again, I don't want to speculate, but between Davis and Gauthier, you've got to think one of them at least. The clock's kind of ticking there.
Yeah, I think that's about where I put it too. I think you can make an argument that Sellers could be above Bailey, although I don't think people should forget about Bailey. He's a 4-star. He's out of Alabama. He was committed to Mario Cristobal. No, who was the previous Oregon guy that's at FSU now?
Taggart. He's not there anymore. He's at FAU now, but
yeah, he was committed to Oregon, and then once they had their turnover and everything, he uncommitted and committed to South Carolina, but very highly rated out of high school. He's got good size. I think he delivers a good ball.
Good deep ball.
Yeah, obviously he doesn't have as the same athleticism as maybe some of the other guys on the roster, but he's someone that I think you continue to keep in mind and don't let him get lost in the mix there. But yeah, I'm with you as far as the bottom two. Braden Davis, Colton Gauthier seem to be a step behind those other guys. We're only seeing the 1 game sample. We didn't see all the practices or the full off season and all of that. We don't really know where those guys' heads are at.
No, but we do know that Sellers got in before those guys. Sellers was the 4th quarterback up. He was before either of those two. And Tanner Bailey was the 3rd guy they brought in, or the first guy other than Spencer and Loop.
Well, and Sellers apparently was one of the first draft picks whenever they did their little spring game draft. At the very least, the social media team chose to feature him.
Did you hear the story Beamer told about that, by the way? Did you listen to his post game?
No.
His one funny, because he was asked, I think it was, I'll credit Matt Vereen from Watch Fox Columbia, who had the question. It was about like the draft and kind of how competitive everybody was. So, and you guys can all go back and watch this video yourself. It's on the Gamecock YouTube channel. Beamer was talking. He said he doesn't remember what team Hunter Rogers was on, but Hunter Rogers gets drafted. And then it occurs to him that there's only one other long snapper in the program, Cole Rasmussen. So he convinces his coach to also draft Cole Rasmussen so the other team can't do any long snapping or kicking, which actually ended up happening. And then Beamer was like, wait, no, we're not going to make a guy learn how to long snap in one day. We're going to have to do a trade here. But apparently Hunter Rogers was getting crafty with the draft.
Hey, you got to play the game, you know? So I like that gamesmanship.
Just hoarding all the long snappers.
From what they, put out on social media, which again, we've talked before, South Carolina, Justin King, Shane Beamer, the whole program, the audio visual people, whatever, they seem to get it, and this is just another scenario where it could have just been here are your rosters, whatever. And they turned it into a whole event and had some fun with it. And yeah, that stuff is standing out to recruits, right? Like if you keep trending on Twitter or whatever, that's where they're hanging out and they're seeing it. So it's a smart move. Looked fun. Oh, but yeah, the point was either the social media staff or the team themselves chose to feature Lenora Sellers as it was Spencer Rattler and Lenora Sellers as the 2 picks that got featured there. Now he's also the in-state guy. He's the freshman quarterback that everyone knows his name. That's another smart reason to get him in there early and let him play as much as he did to keep the home crowd engaged and all that sort of stuff. And he was coming back, and you get a chance to put him into kind of a tough situation and see how he responds.
Yeah, they were down 14 when he gets in there and he gets the game to overtime.
Yeah. Although I think the second score might have been a different quarterback.
It was a pick six. Colin Bryant.
But then they put, I want to say that they had pulled him for like a series, and then they put him back in for the overtime, which is another, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, those 2-point plays. The overtime was weird. I thought they were going to break it off for a tie, honestly, especially after Nichols was hurt. You don't want anybody else to get hurt, but they had a winner. It was only 4 plays in overtime. I guess that's better than playing a full overtime.
Yeah, and I also like that is fun. Honestly, I like the 2-point off or whatever, which is the new
shootout. I think they call it.
Yeah, after 3 overtime or starting.
I think it starts in the 3rd overtime now. Yeah,
which that's fun. But I imagine that they didn't show any of the plays that they would actually run if that was.
No, you're not seeing the real 2-point plays there
because that's where you can get really creative and fun with it. Which we saw a little bit of this past year with some of that. So. All right. Any other?
That's about all I had. We'll be back later in the week to talk baseball and men's basketball. Got another portal ad today, but just a quick little spring game for y'all. Just talk about what we saw Saturday and 100 and 40 something days till North Carolina kickoff. 130 something. I don't have it memorized, but it's in there.
Yeah, we'll start counting again once we get to about 100 days. In the meantime, on GamecockScoop.com, keep up with this excellent baseball season. South Carolina did suffer their first series loss this past weekend to Vanderbilt, although they were competitive in all 3 games. Really blew Vanderbilt out in game 1, and then a lot of errors. Honestly, is something
Yeah,
stood
it's
out to
more
me.
beating yourself. I have a weekend wrap on the website. A lot of takeaways for subscribers this morning. Then all 3 game stories are free if you want to just read what happened. It's tough. It happens. You're not going to win every series in a 14 series season. And you got to just shake it off. You get another huge series next weekend against Florida, which we'll break down when we're back here later in the week.
Right. And you get that one at home. And we talked a little bit last weekend or last week about what an advantage Founders Park can be. So get out there, support them this weekend, and that'll be a fun one. And then, yeah, the only other news before we come back on Thursday this morning, Miles
Stute, I think is how you say it. We'll figure that out before Thursday.
Vanderbilt forward, who averaged about 9 points a game, had a pretty good game against South Carolina this past year, actually, is transferring to South Carolina. He announced that commitment this morning. And we have a little bit of stuff on GamecocksScoop.com right now this morning, kind of analyzing his game and how he fits in. I still think you probably got about two more that you're targeting, 2 or 3 more, which we've kind of gone through on the site. BJ Mack and Amsel are 2 names that kind of stand out to me right now. And we'll see how all that plays out. But we'll be back here on Thursday to preview the weekend series with Florida, to talk about any other recruiting news and stuff like that at that point. And yeah, we'll see you later.